What was the Columbian Exchange? The Columbian Exchange refers to the exchange of disease, ideas, food crops, and populations between the New World and the Old World following the voyages to the Americas by Christopher Columbus in 1492. The Old World refers not only to Europe, but the entire Eastern Hemisphere, which gained from the Columbian Exchange in several ways. The Old World gained new staple crops, such as potatoes, sweet potatoes, maize, and cassava. The exchange not only brought gains, but also losses. European contact enabled the transmission of diseases to the New World that had devastating effects on the native population. In this article, you will take a closer look at the good and the bad that came out of the Columbian Exchange. You will see how the actions of both sides had lasting effects on the future. Transfer of diseases. The list of infectious diseases that spread from the Old World to the New is long. The major killers include smallpox, measles, whooping cough, chickenpox, bubonic plague, typhus, and malaria. Because the native population had no previous contact with Old World diseases, they were defenseless. Before Europeans initiated the Columbian exchange of germs and viruses, the peoples of the Americas suffered from none of these diseases that were brought across on European ships. Although we may never have the exact magnitude of the diseases, it is estimated that upward to 80 to 95% of the Native American population, was decimated within the first 100 to 150 years following the arrival of Columbus. Within 50 years following contact with Columbus and his crew, the native Taino population of the island of Hispaniola, which had an estimated population between 60,000 and 8 million, was virtually extinct. Adults and children alike were stricken by wave after wave of epidemic, which produced catastrophic mortality throughout the Americas. Central Mexico's population fell from just under 15 million in 1519 to approximately 1.5 million a century later. On some Caribbean islands, the Native American population died out completely. This loss is considered among the largest demographic disasters in human history. By stripping the Americas of much of the human population, the Columbian Exchange rocked the region's ecological and economic balance. Economically, the population decrease brought by the Columbian Exchange indirectly caused a drastic labor shortage throughout the Americas, which eventually contributed to the establishment of African slavery on a vast scale in the Americas. The transfer of foods. The transfer of foods between the Old and New World during the Columbian Exchange had important consequences for world history. There are two channels through which the Columbian Exchange expanded the global supply of agricultural goods. First, it introduced previously unknown species to the Old World. Many of these species, like potatoes, sweet potatoes, maize, and cassava, also known as manioc, resulted in caloric and nutritional improvements over previously existing staples. Other crops such as tomatoes, cacao, and chili peppers were not by themselves especially rich in calories, but complemented existing foods by increasing vitamin intake and improving taste. In many instances, the New World foods had an important effect on the evolution of local cuisines. Chili peppers gave rise to spicy curries in India, to paprika in Hungary, and to spicy kimchi in Korea. Tomatoes, uh, tomatoes specifically altered the cuisine of Italy and other Mediterranean countries. Potatoes did not exist in Europe before 1492. They first appeared in Ireland sometime in the late 16th century, and very quickly the starchy tubers, high in calories, easy to cultivate, and capable of rot-free storage in the ground, became the island's staple crop. The, the increased nutrition provided by potatoes allowed Ireland's population to explode, from 1 million in the middle of the 17th century to 8 million 200 years later. It is believed that the Native Americans began to use tobacco about around the 1st century BCE. Tobacco was quickly adopted by Europeans. At first, tobacco was regarded and consumed only as a medicine, but later became recreational. The discovery of the Americas provided the Old World with vast quantities of relatively unpopulated land well suited for the cultivation of certain crops that were in high demand in Old World markets. Crops such as sugar, coffee, soybeans, oranges, and bananas were all introduced to the New World, and the Americas quickly became the main supplier of these crops, which were sent back to the markets in Europe. European colonial powers, led by France, Spain, and Great Britain, tried to use the colonies to improve their economies and become self-sufficient through mercantilism. They created colonies in Africa, the Americas, and Asia. The colonies provided raw materials, which were then turned into manufactured goods and sold back to the colonies. Under this system, European countries competed for raw materials in new markets. They gained wealth from gold and silver. Transfer of technology. The written alphabet is notable because of how it was used by the Europeans. Since Native Americans had no formal written language, Europeans knew that establishing relations by way of treaties would be difficult. Europeans educated natives by teaching them to read and write a European language. This would help break down barriers, thus integrating cultures. At first, the natives were skeptical about the written language because natives never followed a written agreement. Blood oaths were their highest form of agreement. Europeans did not just try to teach them language for trade. Europeans used their alphabet to educate natives as well by trying to convert them to Christianity. New farming equipment like the plow ignited the New World economy and improved health on a long-term basis. The plow was highly important because it cultivated large areas of land, creating a surplus of plants for both native and Europeans. Animals such as horses and oxen would pull the plows across the land. This helped to cultivate more land. The vast farmland and rich soil were transferred into crop fields, which then led to the establishment of towns. Because crops could be grown and the land could be cultivated, towns began to be established near farms. Natives created villages, giving evidence of them moving away from the hunter-gathering society. Guns and knives facilitated hunting and fishing for Native Americans. While natives already had knives, what they used were very malleable because they were made of obsidian and could not be used over and over like the European knives made of steel and iron. Before guns, spears, hatchets, and bows and arrows were the most common used weapons of the Native Americans. A bow and an arrow allowed for hunting from greater distances, but they did not do the same amount of damage as a gun. Some animals required more than one arrow to be killed. When natives witnessed the destructiveness of guns, they realized that they could use them for hunting large animals. Natives now, because of the migration of Europeans, also had horses to ride. Natives could now chase down large herds of animals quicker and with guns. They could kill them quicker. Weapons had such a profound impact on the Native American culture that they soon became the most widely traded goods between Europeans and natives. Transfer of religion. Before the arrival of the Europeans, most Native Americans believed in various gods who controlled various aspects of their lives. While the explorers were on a quest for gold and riches, they also sought to spread Christianity and European ideals. In their view, the peoples they encountered in the New World were uncivilized and ignorant. They brought European ideas and Western religion to the continent, leading to a mixing of cultures. This diversity is still reflected in the populations of North America today. Right or wrong, the Europeans thought they were helping native peoples. The first conversion to Christianity of the Native Americans was under Columbus's direction. The Europeans believed that they were superior to the natives, was the first and foremost in their minds. Although at first there was some resistance to Christianity, the natives were won over by the gifts of horse and rifles, which helped them in their daily quest for food. The slave transfer.
It was all of us from yesterday for pay it forward hard worker. On to number 46. Thank you.
The slave transfer. Slavery had existed as an institution in Africa for centuries prior to Columbus's arrival in the New World. Europeans enslaved and moved millions of Africans to the Americas to plant and harvest sugarcane in the Caribbean. In the West Indies, Spanish settlers developed plantations, or large estates, to grow tobacco and sugarcane. At first, they used Native American labor. Later, this transitioned to the use of enslaved Africans. Africans were marched to some European forts on the West African coast. Tied together, they were traded, branded, and forced to board ships bound for the Americas. By the late 1500s, slave labor was a key part of the colonial economy. While the slave trade in Africa did not begin with the discovery of the New World, by then the demand for labor in the American plantations and the willingness of many African states to cooperate with European slavers led to a great increase. By the mid-1500s, the Spanish and Portuguese were bringing thousands of enslaved people from Africa to the Americas. Europeans saw advantages to using slave labor in the Americas. First, many Africans had been exposed to European diseases and had stronger immunity. Second, Many were already familiar with the type of farming work that they would be performing. Finally, slaves from Africa were less likely to escape since they were not familiar with their new surroundings. It is estimated that between 1500 and 1600, that over 300,000 slaves had been transferred from Africa. That number swelled to 1.3 million over the next century. By the time the slave trade ended around 1870, the number transferred from Africa is said to top 9.5 million.